This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit. What do you guys want to talk about?
Another weekend where I'm struggling to watch all this wrestling content in one short window. I literally got back in town on Saturday from a trip. Came back to record and edit the Friday show late. Finally got it uploaded on Saturday night. And then I turned around the next day and had to watch 2/3 of the Money in the Bank pay-per-view and the AEW Collision show in one sitting. You know, if I didn't know any better, I would make the claim that there's way too much friggin' wrestling in today's market. And a lot of it's no good, which makes it that much more infuriating that I'm bending over backwards to watch all of it. But it is for the people, you know? Plus, AEW Collision was actually a moderately decent show this week, as compared to 7 days ago, where the first hour was basically just an hour extension of Dynamite material. This weekend, Collision actually went back to the CM Punk formula of wrestling presentation. Real wrestling with real athletes and real guys I can take seriously. Then there was the WWE side of the coin, hosting their Money in the Bank special over in London. And we'll talk about all the WWE content first before we get to the AEW report. I was moderately pleased by the time that show was over too. So it wasn't all bad this weekend. I think I was just still in a sour mood after having watched that wretched Dynamite program on Wednesday. I just hadn't mentally prepared myself before sitting down to watch any more modern wrestling. So I expected a lot worse. Luckily, nothing I saw this weekend came even remotely close to matching that awful Dynamite show. Even Retro Raw wasn't as bad as Dynamite was this past week. I mean, the show still sucked, by and large. But even by 1994 standards, it wasn't as bad as the shows normally are. I know we're only approaching the tip of the iceberg, though. Things are slowly trickling downhill right now. I mean, it only starts to become noticeably bad. No, probably right around the time they slapped the world title on Kevin Nash. Crap, that's coming up soon, isn't it? Well then, Happy Independence Day, everyone. You know it's Independence Day when your neighbors are shooting off fireworks at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. But, yes, this was a very special Monday Night Raw edition. July 4th, 1994. It was indeed special. There wasn't much specially good about it, but that is sort of the running narrative with a lot of these retro shows, aren't they? They just keep getting worse and worse and worse with each passing show. I'm sure most of the guys working this thing would have appreciated being anywhere else. Instead of spending the holiday with friends and family, instead of roasting hot dogs out back and lounging around in lawn chairs, these poor unfortunate souls were stuck hanging out in Westchester County in New York, along with thousands of other people in attendance who I guess had nothing else going on in their lives and they would have rather spent their July 4th weekend on a WWE Raw show. Whew. That is passion if I've ever seen it. Now, it's not really newfound knowledge that whenever the holidays roll around, WWF, WWE shows are more often than not phoned in, figuring that most people aren't watching anyway, figuring that the ratings are already going to be down. They're usually not aiming to book any major angles or matches on these kinds of shows. This was really no different from the ordinary. It was lame. But I can't even say it was below average in terms of what we are normally used to seeing. It was just kind of your run-of-the-mill episode of Raw from 1994. Admittedly, the opener to the show was pretty good. Tatanka versus Jeff Jarrett. These guys definitely had their working boots on for this one. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was good enough to where it got me momentarily forgetting about the fact that Double J was still stuck in this go-nowhere death program with Doink. And Doink's been a timely topic in the world of wrestling in the last week or so. If you've been catching the Vice documentary series, they did a recent Dark Side episode on Matt Bourne, which was moderately decent episode. It was more focused on covering Bourne's drug issues than it was going over the timeline of his run in WWF as the original Doink. I still think that Matt did the best job with the Doink gimmick. You know, once he was out of the equation and they turned the character babyface and changed the guy underneath the outfit, to me it was just never the same. And unfortunately, that's kind of where we are now in the summer of '94. Who was it? Was it Ray Apollo that was working the Doink gimmick around this time? Nah. Just never clicked. Anyway, back to the match. They try to work a story angle to keep it mildly interesting. They're having a back and forth match for a while, and about 5 or so minutes into it, they end up doing a spot on the floor where Double J beats the count back in. And this was really weird. Double J, who I thought was still a heel on this program, apparently he still is, he gets on the mic and he tells Earl Hebner that he does not want to win via countout because he's a man of honor. He wins his matches fair and square in the center of the ring like a man. So he tells Earl to restart the match, and the match continues. I can probably count on one hand the amount of times where I've seen a heel refuse to take a win via countout. Maybe unless there's a title involved and the heel knows that the only way for him to win the championship is by pinfall or submission. In that case, it would at least make sense. Here, that was not the case at all. It was just a random match on television with nothing at stake. And Jeff says, "No, I cannot win this way. I must win properly via pinfall or submission." So we come back from break and the match is in progress. Jeff is getting the heat on Tatanka. I did kind of chuckle at one point where Jarrett has Tatanka in a sleeper on the mat. And Randy Savage says, and I quote, "This is turning into one of the greatest matches I've ever seen on Raw. Ooh, yeah." All the while, Double J and Tatanka are just laying on the mat in a stationary hold. Hell of a time for Macho Man to be calling something the greatest match of all time. Literally when the match is at a standstill and nothing is happening. That is when he decides to bring it up. So eventually Tatanka starts milking the comeback. He gives Double J a tomahawk chop from the top rope for a near fall. And then we get the finish. I referenced Doink earlier, so you had to figure he was going to come into play at some point. So Double J tries to take a powder, and who should appear behind him in the aisleway but Dink. And he proceeds to sprit Jeff with, I presume, water. Although you never know in the wacky world of professional wrestling. It was a liquid substance of some sort. And when Double J tries to grab Dink, here comes Doink through the curtain with an actual bucket of water. And he chases Jeff all the way back to the ring so he could roll in. And then Tatanka schoolboyed him and pinned him. On the scale of 1 to 10 in terms of the most uncreative finishes I've ever seen, this is probably a 7 or an 8. Now, Savage and Gorilla Monsoon made up for it somewhat by attempting to make covert pee jokes, saying that Double J was already wet before Doink attempted to throw the water on him. But, I mean, once you realize this fucking Doink Jer thing is still going on, it kind of ruins your enjoyment of it. But then again, it is a holiday. You're used to seeing more goofy WWE antics on these kinds of shows. So, whatever. Even Lawler's King's Court segment this week was relatively underwhelming. Now, to be fair, his guest was Sean Waltman. And if you've ever heard Sean Waltman cut a promo before, well, I'll put it this way. The 1, 2, 3 kid, X-Pac, 6-Pac, whatever you want to call him, he had a lot of upsides as a talent. Promo ability, not his strong suit. He could do a lot of things in wrestling. Talking was not one of them. But luckily he had Lawler as a dance partner to kind of carry the workload here. So Sean didn't really have to do all that much. The best part was the joke right before he came out. Lawler goes, "This kid is so thin, when he was in high school, the teacher kept marking him absent." I laughed. But the segment was all designed to set up the big match for next week's Raw. The 1, 2, 3 kid was scheduled to wrestle Bret Hart for the WWF Championship, which would be a hell of a title match now that I'm thinking about it. I don't ever recall that match happening, but sounds like it'll be enjoyable. And I kind of like the idea that Lawler would try to light a fire under Waltman here. You know, he's pitching that he's solely behind the 1, 2, 3 kid next week because he still hates Bret and his stinking family. And he wants to see Bret get embarrassed and humiliated by losing to a rookie. So he's still trying to throw underhanded shots at him at the same time. He's trying to encourage Kid to win at all costs. If he's got to resort to hair pulling and tight grabbing and all those underhanded heel tactics to get the job done, then so be it. Because a win's a win. And of course, good old clean-shaven, white-meat babyface 1, 2, 3 kid, he just can't muster up the ability to resort to such tactics. He's got way too much respect for Bret to win by cheating. But he's here to let us know that he's going to give it the old college try. He's going to give 110% and do it for the people. And by the time this was all over, I had determined that Sean Waltman's little engine that could babyface run was death for his career. And far be it for me to agree with the heel in any given circumstance, but I was kind of on board with Lawler here. 1, 2, 3 kid's plan of going out there and giving it 110%. That's like one of the worst strategies I've ever heard when you're trying to win a championship. That's a surefire way to be first in line for the Blue Ribbon Award. Sean just came off so lame here. That probably explains why the generic white meat babyfaces traditionally had hard times getting over in wrestling for long periods of time. I mean, it's impossible to want to root for them because they just don't have any grit or fire. Or maybe that was just Sean Waltman's timid personality at this point. Who really knows? In any case, the segment did not do a whole lot for me. But you want to talk about somebody with grit, somebody with fire? Jim the Anvil Neidhart. He had some of that in his match with Gary Scott. Just beat the snot out of the guy for 3 minutes and won with the running power slam. It was actually the Oklahoma Stampede finish that Dr. Death used. Same thing. Meanwhile, Owen's out on the floor, trash-talking Brett and being the best heel of all time. I honestly have nothing further to add to it. The Brett-Owen feud is easily the best story in WWF at this point. The addition of the Anvil was an interesting way to sort of spice up the family drama. Although I don't remember much about Neidhart's run in the WWF during this period. I remember some of the stuff with him later on in like 97 when Owen was feuding with Austin. Like Neidhart was very instrumental in some of that stuff when they were doing the Hart Foundation reunion with Davey Boy and Brian Pillman. But if I'm not mistaken, I think Neidhart ends up leaving the WWF not too long from now and then comes back a little later on. I don't really ever remember the details of what happened or what led up to that. He and Owen did some tag team matches on the side, I remember that, but I don't think that ever really went anywhere. I think the Anvil worked one of the Survivor Series tag matches, and that was kind of it before he left. Not to jump ahead in the time machine too much here. I had more to say about the previous squash, and I did the next one. It's Duke the Dumpster Droese versus Iron Mike Sharp. My notes read as follows. Boring as fuck. Crowd was asleep for most of it. They did some stuff, and Droese won with a wacky elbow drop. I still can't believe this Duke the Dumpster gimmick is around for another 3 fucking years. How? How in the world Vince kept this thing around all that time? Beyond me. I know he liked his poop jokes, but, I mean, there was a cap on this thing well after it debuted. Now that I think about it, he kept Sparky Plug around for all those years, so maybe I shouldn't be all that shocked. Moving on, though, for our TV main event, it's The Undertaker versus Mike Bell. And, it's so bizarre. I remember this storyline vividly. I know what it's all leading up to when we get to SummerSlam. I even vaguely remember some of the preceding TV angles they shot with the lead up to it, before they did the actual reveal. And it's so strange because if you watch this match in particular, you're seeing this large, tall man in the ring portraying the Undertaker gimmick. It looks like Taker. The gear's the same. The hairstyle's the same. They even gave him all the fake arm tattoos. But among the most revealing things that make it apparently obvious that it's not Mark Calloway, you watch the movements in the ring, and it's so clearly not the original Undertaker. Now, for those that never knew, the guy working the phony imposter Taker gimmick, that was primetime Brian Lee. He'd been working in Smoky Mountain Wrestling around that same time. I don't ever remember if he was exclusively signed to the WWF yet, or if he was doing like the split contract with Cornette at the same time. I think he still worked with Smoky Mountain until they went under in 95. But it's so strange watching all this again in hindsight. I always remember thinking that something was off. But even as a kid, I never really put two and two together that this was a fake Undertaker. Like, the movements were always what gave it away. Like, Brian Lee, he tried, but he could never master the way that Mark would do the slow walk or the sauntering around the ring. He always looked kind of stiff with all the offense. The old skull rope walk spot always looked horrible, but I'm surprised he even pulled it off, period. But, like, even when he went to do the pin after hitting the tombstone, just the way he folded Bell's hands on his chest for the rest in peace pin, it wasn't the way that Mark did it. And, like, if you're watching this stuff and you're really paying, like, close attention to it, you know that something is off. I mean, they really tried with the storyline. Credit where it's due. They could get away with doing stuff like this back in the 90s because I don't think anyone would have ever batted an eyelash at it. Yeah, there were probably some people out there that were suspicious. Some people were probably like me and they realized that something was weird with it. But you didn't have large swaths of people in on the gag. People weren't calling it out in the venues or exposing the reality of what was going on. You kind of look at it now with modern eyes and you realize you really can't do shit like this today. At least for not long stretches of time. People would immediately figure it out. The dirt sheets would be all over it in no time. Now, of course, Brian Lee did some other work in the WWF later on. A couple years out. Oh, God, what was that? What was that biker faction they did with Bryan Adams and the Harris twins? It was the DOA? Whatever their names were at the time. I think Brian Lee was Chains. Bryan Adams, I forget, was he just Crush? I think he just stayed with that name. I think the Harris brothers were 8-Ball and Skull. I have no idea which one was which, don't even ask. But that was the good old Russo era of the WWF, where he was overseeing a lot of the undercard and most of it was fucking rotten. Now, I had seen a lot of Brian Lee's work later on in Smoky Mountain and came to learn that he was actually a very solid worker. He just got saddled with a bunch of horrible gimmicks in the WWF, so you never got to see any of it. The fake Undertaker was not what I would call a career-defining moment for Brian, but, he and Mark were good friends. That was pretty well established, so that was also beneficial when they put him under the gimmick. It also helped that Brian was tall. So, even if the height difference between him and Mark was noticeable, it wasn't substantial enough to make a difference on television. At least I didn't think it was. I should also mention the angle they did afterwards here. They had Paul Bearer come down to try and lure Taker away with Earn. But through the power of the American dollar, Ted DiBiase was able to buy him back again. It was kind of dumb. And they stretched this out for like 3 or 4 minutes. I have no idea why. But, they're still working under the impression that people haven't already figured out what's going on. It was cool to see Paul Bearer back in the equation again. But they still have a couple months to milk this imposter Taker storyline. So if you're not already sick of it now, buckle up. Take some ibuprofen to get you through the next month or so. Maybe that's what I ought to do. Start taking some ibuprofen before watching these retro Raws. Maybe I won't get so lightheaded at the sheer horrors that are happening in front of me. But there are other solutions as well. LSD isn't a bad option. Of course, I'm merely kidding. Don't do drugs, kids. And stay in school. And if you're watching holiday editions of wrestling on TV, don't expect much. Those are vital life lessons from the FSWR channel as we get ready to transition into this Money in the Bank report. Let's recap. Don't do drugs. Don't drink. Stay in school. And don't watch WWE during the holidays. And don't watch Money in the Bank. That's another life lesson you'll look back on and thank me for. Luckily for me, unlike that abhorrent Dynamite show that I watched live this past week, I actually forgot that Money in the Bank went live on Peacock in the early afternoon on Saturday. So after I got finished recording and uploading the late Friday show, I immediately sat down to watch part of the show, and I had the esteemed pleasure of being able to fast forward through large chunks of this 3.5-hour trudge. That way I could watch parts of the show on Saturday night and then finish up with everything the next day. And I wasn't handcuffed into having to suffer through the whole frickin' thing. Now, as I mentioned a while ago, they were in London for this special. And as normally the case is when WWE does events overseas, the crowds are much more lively than they are in the States. And it's always a packed house for these things. I believe their attendance for this event at the O2 Arena was, I think I read 18,885. That was probably exaggerated. I would say in the ballpark of 18,000. I mean, they were definitely packed. And like I said, the crowd was very good. There were things that I skipped over, but for the matches that I watched in full, they were pretty hot for most of the show. The opener on this thing was the men's Money in the Bank ladder match. And I'm actually kind of glad they started with this because I already knew that they were going to be doing a girls' ladder match later on. I mean, putting this on first was at least a surefire way to make sure they did not immediately kill the crowd. In it, we had Butch, Shinsuke Nakamura, Santos Escobar, Damian Priest, Ricochet, LA Knight, and Logan Paul. A very weird, incongruous number. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to settle on 7 people for this match. Seemed a bit odd to me. But as I figured would have been the case, LA Knight was the most over of the bunch. In fact, he was so over, whenever Knight was in the ring breathing, the people were showering him with cheers of joy and admiration. I mean, he could have pissed in everybody's popcorn bucket and the people would have still cheered him. He was getting those Steve Austin babyface pops. And while Knight was certainly great with just about everything he did, got to admit, Logan Paul, he was equally as awesome in this match. I think one of my favorite moments was the split few seconds where he and Damian Priest were collabing together. And his way of rationalizing this was, Priest, you're tall. I'm tall. So we should team up. And Priest was like, oh, that's some good-ass logic right there. So they proceed to set up some tables on the floor, wherein Priest then immediately gives Logan an uppercut to the jaw and lays him out like a geek. That was funny. I also enjoyed the spot a moment or two later where Ricochet does a really impressive looking dive through one of the ladders out to the floor. And of course, the people are cheering moments later because who should then be in the ring but LA Knight? And you know what he was doing? He was standing by the ladder. He had not even began to ascend the ladder, and the people were already cheering him like he was God. The people said, Ricochet did a dive. That's kind of cool. But holy shit, look who's in the ring. It's LA Knight. Yeah. That got a bigger pop than the fucking dive spot. Just LA Knight existing was a bigger deal than Ricochet doing suicide topes out to the floor through ladders. Because pro wrestling, at its core, will always be about the larger-than-life personalities, no matter what the dumbass marks try to sell you otherwise. Remember that for a later date. And I hate to honestly say it, because I know there were other guys involved here, but for the majority of this thing, it was the Logan Paul LA Knight show. There were 5 other guys in there, but they were more or less inconsequential to the overall conversation. Now, I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, for the most part, I don't think anyone actually thought that anyone else stood a chance of winning, which of course didn't bode well for them by the time the finish rolled around. I'll get to that in a minute. Generally, though, and I've talked about this before on the channel, it's hard for me to really grade these matches because I don't particularly like the constant car crash form of wrestling. Especially in today's climate where you see nothing but these kinds of matches more often than not. I mean, I literally just saw a 64-year-old man do a stupid ladder stunt on live television just several days ago and nearly cripple himself. And here I am on a Saturday night watching virtually the same thing with 7 other guys. Only difference is most of these guys are agile and not physically beaten up from 20 plus years of ring bumping. Most of these damn Money in the Bank ladder matches all blend together too. I mean, you watch these matches every year. Eventually they all kind of lose their mystique after a while because they're all kind of the same. Mostly you're just watching for the car crash spots and waiting to see who wins at the end. What I saw was all right. Again, I don't like these kinds of matches. Ever since they took this gimmick match and made it its own standalone pay-per-view, it doesn't really hit home the same way it did when it used to be a special attraction every year at WrestleMania. Plus they had to get the girls involved with it, and you already know my thoughts on that. The table bump with Ricochet and Logan was probably the spot that people will be talking about the most coming out of it. And that's mainly because both guys were teetering on the brink of death. I'm honestly still not entirely sure how Logan didn't break his neck on the landing, but whatever their initial plan was for this, whether that was Ricochet giving Paul the Spanish fly through the tables after Knight shoved the ladder over, in any case, both guys essentially broke the tables with their faces and necks. If the spot was executed by anybody other than these 2 guys, I'm sure they would have either been dead or had their careers ended. Quite frankly, I don't understand why we live in the world now where wrestling is all about seeing who comes the closest to paralyzing themselves in meaningless stunt show matches. But then again, I don't understand a lot of stupid shit that happens in wrestling anymore. So instead of questioning it, I'll just wait for the inevitable to happen. And then we'll revisit every podcast I've ever done where I bitch and gripe about people doing this dangerous shit all the time. So anyway, the finish. Like I said, people wanted LA Knight to win. They didn't give a fuck about anything or anybody else. So of course, in typical WWE fashion, they have LA Knight wreck shop and clean house in the last minute. Also, Damian Priest could sneak up, hit LA Knight with a scary-looking Falcon Arrow suplex off the top of the ladder. And then Priest just grabbed the briefcase and the people booed. Totally sucked the air out of the room. And I even said, in one of my more recent SmackDown reports, if LA Knight doesn't win, the people are going to shit all over the match, possibly try to start a riot in the parking lot and set a few cars ablaze. As of this recording, I have not heard or read any reports about London riots breaking out at the O2 Arena, but the people were not happy with the finish. And I like Damian Priest. I'm actually not entirely opposed to him winning the match. This company needs fresh main event prospects. They've been beating their dicks off with this guy for the better part of 2 or 3 years now. And that guy's not a young dude himself. He's what? Early 40s? I think he's around the same age as LA Knight. I mean, if they're going to try and run with him as a probable world champion, now's the time. Do it before his body completely breaks down on him. You know, the guy's a hell of an athlete. He's a very strong promo. He's got a great look. It just kind of sucks that the closest they'll ever get with him as a world champion in WWE is chasing after their second-tier world belt. The one that Seth currently has. It's why I still gravely oppose the idea of them having two world champions again, but here we are. Can't go back on it now. I like the idea of him versus Rollins at some point for the title. Yeah, I just hope they don't make it like every other Money in the Bank cash-in where he waits to steal the belt after the champ's been beaten and left for dead. That story's been done to death, and it's probably about as uncreative as you can get. A guy like Priest doesn't need to do all that chicken shit stuff. So, I hope they have something bigger in mind for a Priest cash-in. Meanwhile, LA Knight will continue to spin his wheels on SmackDown and be the most over guy in WWE since Bryan Danielson was like 8 or 9 years ago. And they still won't do anything with him. So that was that. And then we had the next match on the card, which was Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler versus Raquel Martinez Lopez Sanchez III and Watch Me Liv Morgan. And as quickly as Liv's music hit, the lyrics said, "Watch me." And I said, "Sure thing. You can watch me blissfully fast forward to the next match. Because my time is precious. And Liv Morgan will never get me to watch and suffer through one of her lame-ass matches. Especially when they involve one of the biggest financial flops in modern WWE history. Obviously, I'm talking about Ronda Rousey. All that money they've ever blown on this woman, they're still paying her boatloads of money to just be another fucking girl on the roster. It's mind-boggling. Oh, by the way, another girl who was doing jobs to live in short title matches involving girls' tag belts. Yeah, that's what they got Ronda doing now. It's almost as bad as AEW signing Saraya to a huge-ass deal so she could literally hang out in the background of a 3-person faction and contribute nothing. She's not even the leader of the group. If her, Tony, and Ruby are the 3 stooges of that group, Saraya's not even Mo, Larry, or Curly. She'd barely even pass for Shemp. She's fucking Joe. The reject 4th stooge. Meanwhile, in WWE, Ronda is so irrelevant at this point, she doesn't even register. It's amazing to think she's still employed. But I guess her and Shayna are going to feud now because Shayna turned on Ronda at the end here and cost her team the belts. Why? Why not? More importantly, who cares? Let's go ahead and move on with the next match. A rather obscure title match idea, but I was moderately surprised by this one. I did not think I was going to get much out of Gunther versus Matt Riddle for the IC title. Thought it was alright. Keeping in mind that most of the build was stuff that had been happening on Raw, so I didn't have much knowledge about the setup of this match going in. They kind of had the story where Gunther had injured Riddle's ankle beforehand, so Riddle went in with a taped ankle. Gunther kind of used that as the targeting point for most of the match. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. On the scale of most Gunther matches, this was probably somewhere in the mid-range. They didn't get all that much time to work with. I think if I remember right, the match only went like 7 or 8 minutes. Not that this needed to be a 20-minute classic or anything. Y'all know how highly I think of Gunther. I was so bummed when they drafted him over to Raw. That was like one of the only redeeming qualities on SmackDown for me. outside the bloodline stuff. Seeing Gunther go out there and smash dudes once in a blue moon. Love watching Gunther's work. It's good to see they're still factoring him in on Raw, but I just don't see him as often now, and that kind of sucks. Riddle, I talked about it before. I kind of run hot and cold with his material depending on who he's working with. I've always kind of liked the quirky personality, mostly in the sense that I appreciated the fact that Riddle's gimmick has been just the fact that he's an extension of himself. Like, he's goofy, but it's not over-the-top cartoony goofy. It also helps that he's a legitimate athlete, so that works in his favor. The fact that he can work and he's a serious MMA fighter. I don't think that people ever really bought the idea that Gunther was going to lose here. From everything I saw, it was just kind of your run-of-the-mill Gunther title defense. It had peaks and valleys throughout, but like I said, I don't think anybody ever thought there was a snowball's chance in hell that Gunther was losing the belt here. Him going over relatively clean with the heel hook was interesting. It's always odd seeing a babyface tap out clean to a submission hold. Am I the only one that still thinks that's weird? I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing it. But I think more of this was just a way to set up the Drew McIntyre return, because he came out to confront Gunther after the match. And I actually kind of forgot that he's been gone since WrestleMania. The last time he wrestled was back during that triple threat at Mania with Gunther and Sheamus. A damn good three-way from what I remember, too. That was like one of my favorite matches on both nights of that Mania card. But Drew got a hell of a pop when he came out. Laid out Gunther with the Glasgow kiss. Then he hit his Claymore kick and held up the IC title. So I guess that's your next big featured program for SummerSlam. And that could be a lot of fun. If I recall, this was the match that I originally wanted to see at Mania, before they shoehorned Sheamus in there to make it a three-way. But we'll see we'll see where it goes. Good to see Drew back in the equation again, and we'll see what he and Gunther can do together. Then we come to the Dominic Mysterio-Cody Rhodes match. And again, much like the Gunther match, with having virtually no prior knowledge about any of this feud since they had been building it up on Raw, after seeing this transpire, I can confidently say this is the greatest 8-minute match of all time. I loved every moment of this from start to finish. And if Dom Mysterio is not voted Rookie of the Year at the end of the 2023 awards, I will not only call bullshit on every mark that votes to those Observer Awards, I will personally create a new FSWR segment just so we can vote Dom Mysterio Rookie of 2023. Now, while objectively speaking, it's sort of weird to wrap my brain around the idea that Cody would somehow go from feuding with the likes of Brock Lesnar to now all of a sudden in his next major feud in WWE, he is now in a rivalry with Dom Mysterio, of all people. The namby-pamby chicken shit little toad who hides behind his girlfriend most of the time. It's hard for me to conceptualize how Cody would sort of detour away from the Brock stuff and then work his way down the totem pole to this. But somehow, they made it work. This is so awesome. The entire match was Dom trying to play the cat and mouse game with Cody. Cody from the get-go was not having any of Dom's bullshit. The whole first 5 minutes of this was Dom cheap-shotting Cody and catching him off guard whenever he could. Whether that was Rhea getting involved and running distractions or Dom running around the ring like a scalded dog. I think my favorite part was when Dom tried to run all the way up the aisleway and Cody caught him. So he grabs him by the collar and he drags him all the way down the aisleway to throw him back in the ring. Made even better by the crowd doing their whoa wind-up chant. I don't think I've ever seen that happen in the context of this spot, but it worked very well. And I don't mean to gloss over Rhea because she's great. I mean, she was just as instrumental in this match as Dom and Cody were. Like, her trying to goad Cody into punching her on the floor was hilarious. Mostly in that Rhea is one of the few female athletes in wrestling that I could buy actually getting physical with a lot of the guys and making it look believable. Now, Cody's a bit of a stretch, albeit, but it's not totally implausible if Cody let his guard down long enough to see Rhea maybe get a few stiff shots on him. But even in terms of Cody making his comeback at the end, we're also used to seeing everybody in wrestling do like 75,000 kickouts and a million moves in every match. This was one of the most simple babyface comebacks I've seen in wrestling probably since like the late 90s. There were no bells and whistles to any of it. Cody just made his comeback. He reversed his 619 attempt from Dom and turned it into an Alabama Slam airplane spin combo. Then he hit that middle rope cutter. And then he hit one crossroads, pinfall 1, 2, 3. Simple as that. I was almost flummoxed with how simplistic this finish was. Now, part of me was wondering if that was intentionally done to try and idiot-proof the match. But the more I think about it, I don't see why Dom would have needed it. He's worked high-profile, lengthy pay-per-view matches by now. He's proven he can do them. I'm thinking they just wanted to give Cody a big decisive win here to make sure people know that he's still the guy. Now, this will probably end up leading to him getting back into the feud with Brock as we approach SummerSlam, and that would make sense. I'm definitely intrigued to see how they go about getting there again. The Dom Rhea stuff is awesome. And even if this was just a temporary pit stop program to give Cody something to do to keep him occupied, they surely could have done worse. It was perfect for what it was designed to do. And again, with Dom, he's the perfect guy to put in this spot. Having him do a quick, concise job to Cody like this, it worked. He's always going to maintain his heat no matter what. The people love to hate this guy. And as long as he's able to generate the heat with the people, they could beat this guy into powder, it won't matter. Now, again, there's always a caveat to statements like that, because you never know with wrestling crowds. But so far with Dom's WWE run, he's a proven commodity when it comes to being a reliable heat magnet. I just hope they're smart enough to realize what they've got in the palm of their hands when it comes to Rhea. She's like the closest thing WWE has right now to a real breakout star in the making. And I'm not entirely convinced that WWE has realized that yet. I'm not talking like breakout star for the female division. We're already past that. Rhea's well surpassed that record. I'm even willing to suggest that she could top a lot of the men right now in terms of star-making ability. We all kind of remember that period several years ago where Becky Lynch was one of the hottest personalities in the entire company. She was outdrawing the men in the merch sales at one point. Rhea could be at that level if the people got behind her enough and WWE actually went there with her. They'd have to eventually turn her babyface, break her away from Dom, and that would be kind of disappointing because that duo's great. But the more I see of her, the more I realize that she's got that it factor. And that's a rare thing to come by in wrestling these days, especially when it comes to the girls. I just hope they don't blow their opportunity with her and miss out. And they probably will, because it's WWE. They always fuck everything up. But I really want to hold out hope that they get it right with Rhea. I hope they don't botch her. So anyway, for whatever reason, they decided that they needed to kill some time on this already way too long premium live special. So who should they trot out there but Captain Fruity Pebble himself, John Felix Anthony Cena, with the receding hairline and all. He, well, in short, he flew to London so that he could come out here and stall for time by talking about how WWE management has fucked over the United Kingdom fans for decades, not showing them enough appreciation for their loyalty to the product. And of course, as we all know, Cena's the poster boy for the UK fans. Yeah, he's on their side, you see. He's the one that's been bending Vince's arm, trying to get WWE to host a WrestleMania show in London. He's the guy that knows how undervalued the UK fans are. And of course, I'm not buying a fucking word the guy says because he's been blowing smoke up our asses for the better part of 20 years. The only thing I got out of the promo was, oh, look at that. Cena still going for the cheap pops. And the people are still suckers enough to buy into the BS. All those years of chanting, let's go Cena, Cena sucks. And they've all completely forgotten what prompted that initial chant to begin with. After having this overrated fucking jagoff rammed down our throats for the better part of 10 years, burying one potential main event star after another and ruining multiple chances in WWE for them to create and establish new main event top talent. The list is way too numerous right now. I'm not even going to go over it now. I don't have another hour of podcast time. But the short summary is that Cena wants WrestleMania to come to the UK, and the people are going to be very disappointed when that does not come to fruition anytime in the near future. And Cena will once again look like a hypocrite for lying to the fans and selling them short. But I guess because this wasn't enough of a complete waste of 10 minutes, who should then come out to interrupt him? Of all people, but Grayson fucking Waller. I screamed. And then I said, please, for the love of God, do not let this drag out for another 5 minutes. Because I've had about all I can take. And it more or less did. Waller did a stupid heel promo. Said it would be better if Mania was hosted from Australia. The people booed. Called him a wanker. I'm well aware that I'm not a London native, but I know that is a highly offensive term. Doesn't mean the same thing as it would over here in the States, but it is very derogatory. And Cena tried to blow him off. Waller basically stopped him in his tracks so he could jump him from behind. And finally, Cena fired back on him, hit him with the AA, and that was pretty much it. I have no idea what the point of any of this was, other than to, I guess, possibly tease the idea of John Cena versus Grayson Waller for SummerSlam. To which my first thought is, please God, no. And my second thought, of all people to bring Cena back to feud with, this fucking guy? I know he was one of Shawn's boys in NXT, but seriously, what is so fucking special about this guy that people are seeing and I'm not? All of his talk segments are death television on SmackDown. To this day, I don't think I've ever seen him wrestle a match. Maybe in NXT, when I was still watching that dreck a couple years ago, I may have caught like one or two of his matches. Lord knows I could remember them. And they're going to waste a Big Four pay-per-view match with John Cena on this fucking dweeb. I don't even like Cena, and I know this is wasting a comeback match for him. Even if Waller wins, so what? Cena's done jobs to everybody he's worked with in the last 3 years. The guy comes back once every 6 months. It's not like he's a regular star at this point. Him doing jobs for people in 2023 when it doesn't matter is just pointless. You know, at least the match with Theory was done with a guy that could feasibly draw money for WWE later on down the road. Theory's actually talented. Grayson Waller? He's just a dude. So I didn't get the point of this at all. This is a Raw segment being thrust into the middle of a premium live event, because I guess they needed to stall for time. And I guess tease the idea that WrestleMania 41 could possibly happen in London. Is it out of the realm of possibilities? No, not really. It would be kind of cool, I guess, for those international fans. I don't really give a fuck where WrestleMania happens. I'm more so concerned about who gets booked on the card. They could have WrestleMania in Dubai. If the card sucks, I couldn't care less. So, we will see. Stay tuned. Speaking of not caring about things, the women's Money in the Bank ladder match was next. And I said I did a good amount of skipping on this show. You could probably put 2 and 2 together with figuring out which matches those were. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about this because I didn't watch it, obviously. All I know is that they sent 6 girls out there to do a car wreck stunt show match, just like the men did in the opener. I know Io Sky won. And the last image I saw was Becky Lynch and Bayley standing there in between the rungs of the ladder, handcuffed to each other. Meanwhile, Io is sitting at the top of the ladder, holding up the briefcase for a solid 3 minutes. And Bayley and Becky had to pretend like they could not just tip the ladder over with their free hand and shit-can Io out to the floor. The visual looks stupid. The right girl won. Not that I really had any vested interest either way. I don't know why the hell they put Trish Stratus in this thing. That just seemed like a disaster waiting to happen. Guess she was fine afterwards because they weren't carting her off in a body cast. I did see one of the replays with the bump Zelina Vega and Zoe Stark took, where it looked like Zelina nearly killed herself with a flipping powerbomb off the ladder onto another ladder. You know, that's always the kind of thing you like seeing. Or girls nearly breaking their necks and dying doing the same dangerous, stupid stunts the guys are doing in ladder matches just an hour prior. You know, the difference is the girls don't have nearly as much body mass to cushion those landings. So most of the time it just looks uncomfortable to watch. But I guess the damage control thing is finally done and over with, because Bayley tried to fuck over Rio at the end, and it blew up in her face. So thank God for small favors. Meanwhile, Becky Lynch continues to be just another girl on the roster. I mean, her booking's almost as atrocious as Ronda's. They've completely dropped the ball with her. Remember a few years ago when Becky was like one of the hottest talents in the company? Now she's barely a blimp on the radar. It's WWE booking for you. So that was a good 20 minutes I saved right there. Which then brought us to Seth Rollins and Finn Balor for the World Heavyweight title. The second-tier world title. The one that currently plays second fiddle to Roman's. Because, you know, WWE just randomly decided one day that we need to reintroduce 2 world titles again. For literally no reason. After all the unification garbage and devoting all that time and energy to let everybody know that Roman's the undisputed top guy in the company, all that's been completely thrown out the window. They now have Seth as the top champion on Raw. Roman's the top champion on SmackDown. None of the shit makes sense. But damn it all, the people love singing Seth's music. And that's all that matters. God, do these fucking people love singing Seth's song. The same 3 or 4 notes over and over again. Beethoven wrote 9 symphonies. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote God only knows how many chorales. All those classical pieces pale in comparison to Seth's fucking music. Because nobody sings louder and more passionately than WWE fans when it comes to that garbage-ass theme. Of course, you can't forget the "Burn it down!" with that classic Axl Rose screech. I'm not even going to try to imitate that. Seth's entire entrance is a trip in and of itself. Leave out the music for a minute. If you just watch him come through the curtain with the gesticulations, I still have no idea what he's doing half the time. The goofy conducting, the air swimming, the nasally maniacal laugh. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. I still have no idea if the guy's a fucking face or heel. Does anybody know? Can someone just take 3 seconds and confirm whether or not Seth Rollins is supposed to be a fucking babyface or a heel? I really would like to know the answer to this, because I still have not figured it out. Everything about him just screams douchebag, but the people are so into his shtick, I can't tell. So anyway, the match. Now that I've spent the better part of 2 minutes ranting about Seth Rollins' nonsensical gimmick again. Yeah, he defended against Balor. And I had actually completely forgotten about this, but Cole mentioned it while Balor was making his entrance. The last time these guys wrestled on pay-per-view, it was back at SummerSlam in 2016, when they were reintroducing the Universal title as the top belt. The one that Roman currently holds now. And that was the match where they did the spot on the floor where Rollins gave Balor the running buckle bomb into the barricade, and Balor ended up dislocating his shoulder and required him being out of action for months. He ended up having to relinquish the title the next night on Raw, because Balor actually won that match. I forgot about that. And I remember seeing it live. I remember that specific moment vividly. Can't believe it's been 7 years. But I guess it really has been that long since these guys have met in the ring. At least for a major world championship, it has. It's been a long fall for Balor since that point. I don't think WWE has ever considered a world title run for Balor since that point. That injury was pretty much the nail in the coffin for Balor's main event run. Took him 7 years just to make Balor a challenger for the second-tier world title. Think about that. You know, the match was fine. There wasn't anything wrong with the match in terms of the spots they did. You know, much like the Riddle match earlier, they had Seth tape up the midsection for this match so Balor could kind of work over the ribs. That was the central story of the match. Both guys worked hard, but I don't think the drama really kicked in for it until Damian Priest came out later on. You know, for a while, Balor and Rollins were just kind of in the ring doing stuff. The crowds, I mean, they're not dead, but I wouldn't say they were particularly into it. You know, once Priest came out, though, and spent some time looming about on the floor, everybody perked up a little bit because now they had something to hang their hat on. Is Priest going to cash in? Is he going to work the mental mind game story and try to throw Rollins off his game? You know, the other dynamic they had going on here was the idea that since Balor and Priest are technically partners in the Judgment Day, what would happen if Balor won? Would Priest immediately fuck him over and cash in on him? And it ended up building to the spot where Rollins confronted Priest outside the ring, but Priest grabbed a chair and sat down, which led to Balor firing back and cutting off Rollins. He shoved Rollins rib first into the post and then to the announcer's table, gave him a couple double foot stomps, and right as it looked like Balor had the match in the bag, he goes up for the coup de grace. Priest gets up from the chair, which distracts Balor for some reason. So when Balor went to dive off, Rollins moved, and then he just hit Balor with a curb stomp and pinned him. After which Priest glared down Rollins and... no, nothing happened. I guess they were more so focused on working the idea that the Judgment Day might be finally splitting up. Mercifully. You know, it took them 2 years into this failed experiment to finally go there, but, you know, Priest and Balor arguing on the floor after the match, that kind of planted the seeds for the breakup. And honestly, I'm fine with that. The whole Judgment Day thing has been all over the map. You know, from Edge starting the group to getting kicked out less than 2 months later and replaced by Balor, to the fact that to this day, I still never really figured out who the leader of the group was. I mean, the breakout star in the faction was obviously Rhea. Priest. I mean, it finally looks like they're done stalling in first gear with him. I love Dom, but I think he's about ready to branch out with Rhea and do his own thing. Balor, he's always kind of the odd man out, isn't he? I mean, I have nothing against him. I've always liked Balor in WWE. He's probably the weakest link of the bunch, though. You know, they beat this guy like a drum for so long now. It's kind of hard to take him seriously as a main eventer. His main roster runs have really never hit home the same way as NXT pushes have. When he was doing that second run in NXT a few years ago as their world champion, that was probably some of the best work Balor was doing in his entire WWE run. Having great matches with guys like Ciampa and Cole. I think I remember him having a match with Kyle O'Reilly at one point that was really damn good. He always seemed like a bigger deal down there, and all that never really facilitated on the main roster. It sucks because the guy's a good athlete, looks fantastic. He's not the strongest promo in the world, and size-wise, he's definitely not built like the Road Warriors. But I think we're kind of at the point now where they can do away with the Judgment Day. I don't think people are going to lose sleep over it. They tried it. It worked for a period of time. Now it's just kind of redundant. And move everybody on. Let's see what Priest can do as a singles guy. Let Dom and Rhea continue their pairing. Balor, I don't really know what you do with him, but you know, they might figure something out. Overall, good match. You know, but I think the bigger story coming out of it was trying to figure out what they're going to have in store for Priest as the Money in the Bank holder. And like I said earlier on, I really hope they have something more strategic in mind for a cash-in than waiting for the champ to be laying dead in the middle of the ring. That angle's been done to death. And sure, it initially gets a pop when the music hits and the guy comes running down with the briefcase and the referee, but it always makes the Money in the Bank holder look so weak. I get that's why they traditionally have heels win the briefcase so they can do that specific angle, but it's run its course. And you look at a guy like Priest, to me, he's not the kind of guy that needs to resort to those tactics to win the championship. I mean, he should probably be winning clean if we're honestly analyzing it. But yeah, we'll definitely see what they do. For now, though, let's go ahead and talk about the main event. The event was called Money in the Bank, but we all know what the real featured match was. That was, of course, frankly, the only storyline that's been carrying this product for the last 3 years. The Bloodline. And tonight we've come full circle. They called it the Bloodline Civil War. The Usos have now forced Roman's hand. It is now family versus family. Jimmy and Jay versus Solo and Roman. Put together a hell of a video package before this thing, highlighting all the weeks of story and explaining how we got to this point. Very well produced, as it always is with WWE. They always knock it out of the park with those cinematic movie promos. And, well, at the time the actual video package started airing, we We had almost a full hour of feed left. Since I was watching on replay, I had the luxury of being able to track that. And normally, as we've seen from a lot of bloodline matches in the last couple years, they usually give these things a lot of time, especially when Roman's involved. So, while it seemed like there was a lot of airtime left, when they rang the bell for the actual start of the match and they actually took their time building up to the drama, I mean, it was more like 45 minutes overall. Well, plus you have to factor in the ring intros. That took about 12 minutes out of it. And well, I'll admit, this took a while to get going. Some of the middle portion, when Solo and Roman were getting the heat on the Usos, there was a lot of downtime there. I think my favorite moment of the whole match actually happened during the heat portion, though, which is oddly comedic. As usual, modern wrestling fans have a reputation for going into business for themselves and trying to hijack a lot of these pay-per-view specials. So as a means of entertaining themselves while the heels were kicking the shit out of the Usos, rather than the fans do something constructive like, I don't know, try to rally behind the babyfaces to make a comeback, instead they all began chanting in unison, "If you hate Roman, stand up." And it sounded like they were trying to chant this in the form of a song. I had no idea what it would have been, but that wasn't even the best part. The best part was Roman's reaction, where he sits on the ring apron and he turns to Paul and goes, "England's the dumbest place of all time. Bunch of idiots." Almost a direct quote. Job well done, Roman. That got a pop out of me. What a fucking heel. Now, of course, the fans were just being jack-offs. They did not give a shit about Jimmy or Jay getting pummeled here. Keep in mind, they are the babyfaces. But now they were just looking for a means to entertain themselves by giving Roman a hard time. Let's be honest, though, up to that point, it was probably the most noteworthy thing about the match. That and Paul Lee trying to fire up Roman on the floor by telling him not to let Jay get under his skin. But they milked the hell out of the heat portion. Multiple cutoffs with the Usos, trying to go for the hot tag. A couple hope spots here and there, but Roman and Solo were right there to shut them down again. But eventually, Jay got in there and started firing back. Picked up the energy with a nice comeback. Wade even mentioned this on commentary, how a lot of the match had been a one-sided beatdown with Roman and Solo controlling a lot of the action. So when the Usos finally got back on offense, gave everybody a new sign of life. They got into it. I like Jay channeling some of the familial ties with the moves, doing some of Rock's fiery offense with the right-hand punches. I think there was a Rikishi-inspired hip attack in the corner. Or maybe that was Umaga. One of the two. But that was a nice touch. And they ended up getting a nice near fall out of Roman with a double super kick. Eventually it breaks down with all four guys. Roman's in there trading with Jimmy for a bit. And when Jimmy finally goes up for the big splash, Roman catches him with the guillotine choke. And they milk that spot for a little bit while Jimmy tries to fire back and get Jay in there with a blind tag. They end up doing the ref bump spot, which actually kind of looked like it may have resulted in a legit injury. I always forget the poor guy's name, but the referee that was involved here, he gets bumped through the ropes. And I have no idea how this happened, but I think he somehow ended up falling through the ropes and landing right on his left knee with most of his body weight. It may have looked like Roman had stepped on him too. Talk about shit timing. I hope he's all right, though. But, well, he's down, selling in air quotes, possibly as a shoot. But the Usos are able to get the visual pin off the 1D. And when the Usos go up for the double-assisted splash, the heels cut them off. Solo and Roman do the spear Oriental spike combo onto, I think it was Jimmy. And they're trying to do the stack-up pin like Roman did with Danielson and Edge a couple years ago at Mania. Only this time, the Usos have been watching their tapes. Because they looked at that footage and said, nah, that burial pinfall doesn't work for us, brother. So, of course, they kicked out. Probably got the biggest pop out of a kick out that I've heard in the entire year of 2023. And everybody's selling it perfectly. Roman shitting himself. Heyman shitting himself. Solo's aghast. The people are all standing in peeing streams of joy. It's at this point that I determine this referee is either the greatest seller of all time or his leg is seriously fucked up. And he was visibly struggling to put weight on that left leg, so I think he may have landed wrong during that bump. In any case, though, God, the last few minutes were so great. They do an awesome spot where Solo misses a running splash to the announcer's desk. He goes down in a crumbling heap, sells it like he's dead. Meanwhile, in the ring, Roman and Jay are doing some back and forth for a minute, which ends with Roman giving Jay a spear. And right as he goes for the pin, the ref counts 1, the ref counts 2, and Jay kicks out. And I actually caught this the first time. Didn't put a lot of thought into it at first. But with the way the camera was directly filming this, they were so clear to show that Jay had balled up his fist. From the angle they showed, you see Jay's arm in the crotchular region of Roman's gonads. And before the announcers even drew attention to it, I'm like, did Jay just use a tactful low blow to kick out of a spear? Or was that one of the luckiest kick-out spots of all time? Sure enough, the announcers mentioned it during the replay. Jay used a low blow to kick out. And with the way Roman sold it, it was excellent. It looked accidental. But then you look at it in hindsight and you really don't know. Was it accidental? Or did Jay see an opening and take his shot, so to speak? Well, in any case, led to a great finish. The Usos hit a series of super kick shots on the heels. Jimmy tags in Jay, and they do the head shrinker superfly splash. Jay goes to the cover on Roman. 1, 2, 3. And my God, that pop for the pinfall. That was insane. And it was perfect. Because as Cole made sure to emphasize during his outburst of delight at the very end, it's the first time Roman's been pinned since December of 2019. Here we are in the summer of 2023. Roman's first major pinfall loss. And he does the job to Cousin Jay. Now, it's a non-title defeat. But what made it work was that, A, we haven't seen Roman do a job in so long. The finish actually felt impactful. And B, it's another crack in the foundation of Roman's evident downfall in the Bloodline story. I mean, the faction is basically null and void. Sure, Roman has Solo as the bodyguard and Paulie as the wise man. But even that still has an expiry date. Because we don't know what's going to happen with Solo and Heyman later on next year. For all we know, Heyman could be buying his time waiting to fuck over Roman and cost him the belt. It's hard to say because the story's had so many twists and turns, but the idea here was that Roman's not unbeatable. So now we just wait and see what the next move's going to be. I think it's still too early to be considering a title change. I still think that needs to happen in Mania next year. Maybe that's their opportunity to reintroduce Cody into the title equation. Only this time, it's Heyman and Solo leaving Roman and costing him the belt that way. There's a whole slew of ways they could go with that. I just hope they don't jump the gun and start having Roman do more frequent jobs now. Now that he's actually lost the match, the next time he does lose, ideally it probably should be at Mania next year when he finally drops the strap. But having him lose to Jay here, that's what needed to happen. Yeah, they could have taken the easy way out and have Solo do the job. Either way, the Usos needed to win. But at least with a finish like this, if it sets up Jay versus Roman for the title at SummerSlam, I'm not entirely opposed to the idea. The only issue is, I don't know if you're going to get people to actually buy the idea of him winning the belt from Roman. It's the perfect setup to do a title match. But in terms of what you do after the fact, that's always the question when it comes to the Usos, man. I'll talk about it more once we see how it unfolds on SmackDown, but it's something to be concerned about if they actually go through with the title match. It's the okay, then what aspect that I kind of worry about. Yeah, but never mind that for now. Overall, this is a good middle-of-the-road WWE live special, capped by a great main event. Well, I'm not going to say great main event. I'm going to say good match with a great finish. How about that? The opening men's Money in the Bank, that didn't do a whole lot for me as a match, but I like the possibilities of what they could do with Priest as the briefcase holder. LA Knight to me is still wasted potential, but I'll just keep bitching about that on SmackDown for the time being. The Cody Dawn match was excellent. I love that match. The Gunther match was solid. Balor and Rollins was all right. And the stuff that I skipped over was naturally the material that I knew I wasn't going to be remotely interested in. The John Cena surprise was fine for the initial pop. I still hate the idea of him versus Grayson Waller as a featured match at SummerSlam. I still don't understand what this company sees in Grayson Waller. To me, he's just kind of dry and uninteresting. His talk segments are the drizzling shits. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just one of those crusty guys that doesn't understand the Gen Zers. How old is that guy, actually? He's young, I know that for a fact, but is he actually a Gen Zer? Oh, no, he's relatively close to my age, 33. I guess you could call him one of those late millennials. Oh, in any case, the guy's still boring as fuck. But at least we have the SummerSlam hype off and running. We'll see what the Blue brand holds in store for their side of the card. And I guess we'll wait to see how Raw fills in the gaps. And that leads us to turn our attention over to Collision. There was a head-on Collision last week with that Saturday show where they tried to cram in a bunch of Dynamite regulars on there. And the show suffered as a result. Chris Jericho being on the show just drained the life out of everything. That first hour was almost entirely unwatchable. Luckily, they turned it around at the end with that great 8-man tag. And we still know who the standout workers are on that show. This week, they had their heads screwed on straight. And they managed to put out a good, solid 2-hour wrestling program. Still has some issues, but I appreciated a return to normalcy this week. Back to what Punk was promising when he did his return promo 2 weeks ago in Chicago, talking about what this show is supposed to be. And I'm telling you, man, it really has a different vibe than Dynamite does. In a good way. I hate using the term vibe. That's one of those newfound expressions that weed smokers use. But I think it fits the conversation here very well. And I definitely needed a normal wrestling show after what AEW dished out on Wednesday. And they got it right from the open. They advertised an MJF match for the show. So he initially goes out there and beats some hand-picked hometown schlub in about a minute. Kevin Kelly's words, not mine. Taps him out with a label lock. Quick, easy TV win. Something out of what you would normally see on a Saturday night Superstation show with Crockett. And as he's trying to cut the heat promo, of course, he has to bury all the Hamilton, Ontario fans because that's just kind of a thing every AEW heel does to get cheap heat. But he eventually says that he's so confident that he can beat any hometown boy, he'll even put the Triple B on the line to prove it. And, they try to get a little too cute here with sending out the fat indie slob to answer the challenge. The guy was never identified. Turd Ferguson, we'll call him. He sort of meandered out from Gorilla. But as he's coming down the ramp, who should follow in hot pursuit but Ethan Page? Apparently no longer going by All Ego Ethan Page because, well, I guess he's a babyface now. With no real rhyme or reason, after being off television for months. I didn't even know Hamilton, Ontario was his hometown. I knew he was Canadian. I never took the time to actually look up what city he was born in. But sure, we'll go with it. And if there's one thing I've always credited about Ethan Page, the guy can cut one hell of a promo. I don't think I've ever heard him do a straight-up babyface promo. But come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen babyface Ethan Page, period. And admittedly so, the promo wasn't the best. It was kind of a long-winded way of him going around his elbow to get around to his wrist. He talked about growing up with his dad that bent over backwards to make ends meet, talking about how he adopted a lot of things from his dad, including the attitude of never letting anybody say you'll never amount to anything. He basically just ended up calling MJF a bare minimum bum, which I think the crowd tried to get a chant going with, but too many syllables, pal. Didn't work. But he basically goaded Max into putting up his belt in an impromptu title match. And again, it took me a little while to get over the random off-screen face turn for Ethan Page. The fact that it just was never really explained and just kind of glossed over. Now he's all of a sudden the hustle, loyalty, respect, white meat babyface. And we're apparently just supposed to forget the last 2 years where he was cutting Spitfire heel promos and motherfucking the fans at every turn. But okay. I'll humor the idea of babyface Ethan Page for the time being. If not only for this one TV match with MJF. And I gotta say, he wasn't a terrible babyface in peril. The guy's got good selling facials. I'll give him that. When MJF is in there working over the left knee and Ethan Page is favoring it heavily, visibly making it look like a struggle when he's trying to fire up on the comeback. And he even did some nice limping during the rope running spot so he wasn't completely negating the injury. Obviously, I don't need to sit here and tell you how great MJF is. This was a simple walk in the park for him in terms of the way he works his matches. He always works smart and makes sure he does just enough to get the match over. Some people call it lazy. I just call it MJF being keen. They did a nice power slam spot off the top. Page got a good near fall off that hope spot. Looking back, that was probably the only high spot in the entire match, which is why it stood out. Page went for the razor's edge a few seconds later, but his leg buckled from under him. And then MJF took advantage, gave Page the dragon screw leg whip, and then beat him with the heat seeker to retain. I liked it. Good solid match. 11 minutes in total. Nothing they did was silly or over the top. It's good to see Ethan Page back in a featured capacity. I hope they actually try to figure out some shit to do with him because the guy's a fine talent. He's been wasted potential since AEW signed him because Tony's a fucking moron and brings guys in with no vision of how to actually properly use them. I mean, this was easily the best thing I've ever seen him do in AEW. I don't even think it's close. No complaints about it at all. Aside from the random Ethan Page face turn that wasn't really explained, other than, Canada's awesome! Therefore, you should cheer me. Just discount all that deplorable shit I did once upon a time when I was a bad guy. And from there, we go right into one of our first of 3 Owen Hart quarterfinal matches for the evening. Dustin Rhodes versus Powerhouse Hobbs. They've done a couple video packages to try and give this one some oomph. The bigger takeaway, though, has been centering around whether or not this is going to be Dustin's last ride before he takes off into the sunset and calls it a career. I know the guy's been dealing with some health complications lately. I think he just had surgery not that long ago. I mean, obviously he's not young Dustin Runnels anymore. This is not the gold dust of yesteryears. I find it kind of hard to believe that they would make Dustin's last match in AEW a random TV match in a tournament on free television, second on the card. But in terms of talking about him winding down his career, I can definitely see him wanting to maybe bow out after a final send-off on pay-per-view at some point. Or honestly, if you build it up well enough on TV, I think they could do a hell of a rating if they spent a few weeks hyping up a match with MJF. They could do title versus career, Dustin versus MJF. Even if they do it like a TV main event on Dynamite or something, that could pop a big number if they actually devote some time and attention to it. Not just some random hotshot thing that Tony does out of desperation. Just some food for thought if AEW was looking for ways to pique interest on that Wednesday abomination they call Dynamite. Getting back to the match, though, Hobbs, I thought he looked pretty good, all things considered. Again, factor in that Dustin's not a spring chicken anymore, and the fact that Hobbs is still pretty green himself. He hasn't had many opportunities to work longer matches on TV, at least consistently. I thought he and Dustin pulled out a good little match here. I enjoyed it. I'm always going to hate the QT stuff. The fact that he's still anchored to Hobbs is very frustrating. Everything I see out of QT Marshall in this company is just death television no matter what. But, he was more or less inoffensive compared to what I'm used to normally seeing out of him. Dustin got color right before the commercial pitch. Don't know if they really needed that. Again, if you're going to save Dustin's final AEW match for a bigger stage, you could probably save the juice for when it would actually matter. Here it was just unnecessary. But Dustin pulled out all the stops. That man does not go into a match giving anything less than 100%. He's still using that fucking Canadian Destroyer spot, which always irks me. Not the fact that Dustin's using it, just the fact that move exists, period. That's why Petey Williams is always going to have heat with me. Although I'm sure I've seen guys use that move well before he did. He just kind of popularized it. I probably watched Nitro tapes from like the early 2000s when the cruiserweights were doing that shit like every week on television. I just don't remember a lot of it. In any case, they did some nice near falls at the end. Crowd definitely picked up with the energy in the last couple minutes. And they built to a deal where Dustin gets tripped up going into the ropes so QT can give him a right hand. Missing his cue by a good 8 seconds, which buried Aubrey. But that led to Hobbs hitting a double-A spinebuster and getting the 3. Not a shocking finish, but I like what this set up for later on after the Juicy Fruit Ricky Starks match. And then coming out of that, we got another nice promo package to hype the Roderick Strong Samoa Joe tournament match for later. 17 years in the making, apparently. Or at least that's how long it's been since those guys faced off. Was that Ring of Honor footage they used for the tape there? God. That stuff seems like ancient history at this point. But, no, Joe's a great promo. I don't have to tell you twice about that. Roddy is... Well, he's still Roddy. God love him. Great wrestler, great athlete, phenomenal cardio. His promo work, still no good. Poor guy's never really mastered the art of the microphone. But hey, not everybody's Ric Flair or Roddy Piper on the stick. At least the ring work makes up for it. Before we talk about that match, let's quickly talk about this Miro squash. Just like the last time he wrestled, it's exactly what it needed to be. Miro went in there and killed a guy in short order. And now that he's denounced his religious affiliation, killing someone is not going to result in him being banished into hell for all eternity. He beat some dork named Anthony Henry, apparently who is currently working in one of AEW's 97 ongoing factions at the given moment. The group he's apparently associated with is called the Work Horsemen. And Henry definitely got worked over here. So I guess the faction name was fitting. The only thing I didn't like about this was them giving Henry like 30 seconds of offensive flurry on Miro. Didn't need to happen. It just detracted from the match. Aside from that little nitpick, Miro beat him with the camel clutch. And the people are still behind the guy, which is good. I just hope they actually have something planned for him. Because eventually they're going to need to branch out beyond the short squashes and the weird, ominous promos about God. I mean, they've been doing that shit for like the last 2 years, and I'm getting a little impatient here. I think it's time to kick it into a higher gear. You know, have them go after the TNT title for starters, and we're off on good footing. But I'm still hopeful for the redemption of Miro. Part 3. Or whatever chapter we're on. And man, I'll tell you, at this point, it's almost like the people overseeing this show operate under the same wavelengths as I do. In my head, I thought, you know, now would be a really good time to break up the flow of the show with maybe an interview or an in-ring promo. We've had a lot of wrestling. Not a lot of talking, though. So, you know, break up the monotony a little bit here. Sure enough, right on cue, who should come out to join Tony Schiavone but the now reformed, reunited Bullet Club Gold? Jay White, Juicy Fruit Robinson, and the Gun Boys. They all come down to get a little bit of heat on themselves ahead of the tournament round for later on with Ricky and Juice. A lot of the promo was carried by Jay here. And yes, he did the thing I always complain about, where the guys have to grab the mic from Tony while he just stands there looking frumpy. Here, though, I actually think it kind of worked. And I'll tell you why. I think they did this last time where Tony was trying to interview Jay and Juice. They started trying to fuck with Tony and intimidate him a little bit. So I kind of like the idea of the dirtbag heels taking over the segment and acting all crazy. I mean, it fits the personality of Juicy Fruit for sure. Jay, I mean, he's just kind of a dick. So it suits him. I can at least buy it. You know, and he passed the mic back to Tony so the Guns could get some promo time here. And they were good too. Austin in particular is really ahead of the curb on the stick. Holy shit. Jungle Jackass Perry wishes he had that level of charisma on the microphone. Colton still needs a little bit of work, but, I mean, he was fine. I think he'll break out of his shell a little bit more once he gets more exposure. Sounded a little reserved here. But, you know, they're running down Starks, FTR, and CM Punk. You know, saying that in their short window as a team in AEW, they've already beaten all the top shelf guys, including all 4 of those individuals. And that led Tony to intervene again to make the announcement that, as per the restrictions made by some unknown entity, we presume Tony Khan, the heels will be barred from ringside for the upcoming Starks Juice match. I guess under penalty of fine and or suspension. Not sure if that was mentioned, but we can speculate. And of course, the heels are not too pleased about that. I like Jay calling out Tony and saying that he's clearly in cahoots with the higher-ups. That was a good heel line. But that led to Jay getting back on the mic and basically calling out Punk. Talks about the mysterious bag that he's been carrying around for the last couple weeks. And if it turns out to be the AEW World Championship, he can leave it in the ring with the Bullet Club Gold, because that belt plate has Jay's name waiting to be engraved on it. And as for the other members, since FTR have already lost to Jay and Juice, they should defend their belts against them so they can finish what they started. And, eventually all this leads to a really good pre-tape where Punk, FTR, and Starks appear on the big screen. They all get a chance to respond, doing their individual promos. Punk saying he doesn't need to hire bodyguards to watch his back, unlike Jay and Juice are doing with the Gun Club right now. And as it stands with the AEW World title, if Jay wants to know what's in the bag so badly, he can go to AEW shop right now to buy a replica belt, just like MJF did, and parade around as a fake world champion. Good line. And, FTR did a good promo, saying if Juice and Jay are looking to pick a fight, anytime and any place will work fine. And when it comes to Ricky and Juice for later on, the end result is going to be the same the last time they wrestled on television. Ricky on top, Bullet Club down. And before I actually talk about that match, let me conclude with this. Message to everybody on Dynamite right now partaking in the Cucamonga cockfight party every Wednesday. Do you notice how this shit does not have to be that hard? Do you seem to notice that when you keep things simple in pro wrestling, and you don't have 2 hours of endless nonstop crash TV every week, wrestling's actually really fucking easy to book? I just wonder if anybody on that show that actually cares to get better is currently watching the Collision show. Maybe thinking to themselves, maybe this shit doesn't have to be that hard. Maybe if we just simplify our stuff with logical, coherent promos and wrestling matches that had purpose, that had fluidity and common sense applied, maybe we would not actively run off viewers every week. Maybe we could actually keep 50% of the audience. But do those people care to actually learn? That's the more important question. So Starks and Juice. Second of the 3 tournament rounds in the Owen Hart tournament this week. Everyone banned from ringside. It's time to see if Juicy Fruit can get the job done by himself, without his boys lurking about and waiting to pick their spot to screw over Ricky. Well, didn't exactly go according to plan for Juicy Fruit, but he gave Ricky a hell of a fight. He made him work for that victory. I thought the match was solid. Just solid. The crowd, I don't think, was ever really warming up to it. Not for lack of effort on the boys' part. I just don't think the crowd really cared about it for whatever reason. Maybe the predictability of the finish. Maybe they just didn't care all that much about Juice. I don't know. But the fans were pretty quiet for a lot of it. They had a nice simple story going on with Juice targeting Ricky's knee in the early goings. Of course, he worked that over for a lot of the match. Ricky's comebacks were good, and the people sort of came alive for those moments. They always liked the babyface offensive flurry. I did like Juice's tribute to Goldberg with a double leg takedown spear toward the end. Whether or not that was intentional, it looked cool. The spot right before the finish where Ricky came back firing and hit Juice with a spear, also apparently forgetting that he was supposed to be selling his leg from the beating he took for 90% of the match. Oops. Well, John Cena did it for all those years, so I'll give Ricky a free pass. But he hit a great spear. And I even liked the finish where Ricky went for the Rochambeau, but Juice gave him the double leg takedown. And Ricky actually turned that over into a cradle and got the flash pin. That was crafty. Sometimes those out-of-nowhere flash pins work with the right guy. Ricky's the perfect one to do it with. I don't really know if the afterbirth was necessary with Punk and FTR running down to send the heels powdering through the crowd, especially with that crowd, and they were still in Canada, so it was heavily anti-Punk. And when they ran in for the save at the end, boy, did it backfire very quickly. So I don't think that had the right effect. Again, can't really blame the boys for that one. The idea was good on paper, but because of the hostile environment those sissy-ass EVPs have created for the AEW locker room, they've really split this audience down the middle when it comes to the Punk versus Elite cult. And this issue is only really starting to surface now with the side effects translating to television. It was noticeable at the Forbidden Door pay-per-view during the Punk-Kojima match. This show kind of had the leftovers of that audience. And it kind of muffled that great babyface promo they did moments prior. Because you're seeing them running down out there like a house of fire to try and run off the heels, but the fans were more so concerned about trying to hijack the show and boo Punk. Because that's what their pussy-ass Elite fan base told him to do. So that part was kind of lame. In the meantime, Shawn Spears still exists. And he's apparently going to call out Christian for a fight. Yippee. Definitely looking forward to that. Maybe I can still hold out hope that he'll actually develop a personality. But I've been waiting on that since the days of the Perfect 10 gimmick. And I'm still waiting. So at this point in the program, I came to a crossroads. I'd already seen a lot of good wrestling with the guys that I actually wanted to see. And I really did not need to have that momentum thwarted, especially with another girls' match. Especially not with someone named Lady Frost. I still wanted to watch Joe versus Strong while I still had the mental capacity to do so. So, figuring something was going to have to take the bullet here. It's usually a safe bet that the girls are going to fill that obligatory piss break spot. That match went a while, and Chris Statlander won with the tombstone. Do I need to say any more? I'm already over it. There were also a few other things I skipped over before the main event. There was an Andrade promo that, in some sadistic realm, I might have actually been able to find entertainment value with. But then I remembered he's still feuding with the House of Drek. And, that was enough to keep my finger on the fast forward button. So I will go ahead and just talk about the main event. It's Samoa Joe versus Roderick Strong in the last of the opening round Owen Hart tournament matches, with CM Punk on commentary, joining alongside Nigel McGuinness and Kevin Kelly for the occasion, who, by the way, are still doing a bang-up job as a commentary team. Not having to listen to Excalibur make my ears bleed for 2 hours every week. On top of Taz and Shivani jacking off with themselves, contributing nothing, literally nothing to the overall product. It's very refreshing to just hear normal people call a wrestling show for a change. And while, yes, you got Joe versus Roddy on paper, visually it looks like a total mismatch if you look at the size of both guys. But the thing with Roddy that makes him look so believable is that he hits hard, he lays everything in, he's so goddamn quick on his feet. He's like a torpedo. Just no wasted motion with that guy. And it makes for great ring style dynamics. It's the power game versus the agility cardio game. And since these guys already have history together, they know how to lay a match out. They're both ring veterans. They know what they're doing. Having Punk out there to put over both guys and talk about the history with Joe, while yes, it did kind of telegraph the finish in a lot of ways, it is great hearing a wrestler give a more sports-based breakdown on his potential opponents for later on down the road. It's all professionally done. Nobody's out there trying to be intentionally phony or play act. course, I can never get over Roddy's upper body strength. He's a small guy, yeah. You look at his frame and you're like, man, he doesn't look like he could beat up a toddler. But, man, that guy has so much raw power. Like him muscling up Joe and hitting him with those patented backbreakers he always does, that stuff always looks impressive. And while, yeah, the finish was kind of abrupt with Joe locking in the coquina clutch for the knockout victory, I actually kind of like the idea that Joe can just slap on that hold at any given moment and it'll be lights out just like that. I mean, traditionally, that's how Joe's always usually won with that hold anyway. They don't really build up to it. And I think it kind of works better when he manages to put it on somebody when they least expect it. And then after Joe wins, the announcers are hyping up next week's show. We are getting Joe versus Punk in the semifinal round. Awesome. Definitely looking forward to seeing that. And, they even went out with a good worked injury angle. Joe grabs the chair on the floor. He's making it look like he's about to go after Punk. But here come some referees and security to get into the middle of the line of fire. And at first it looks like Joe's going to let cooler heads prevail and he's going to leave. But right before he powders, he slides the chair in the ring so he can go back in and attack Roddy. Drops him headfirst on the folding chair with that sit-out Rikishi driver. And boom, he's out in seconds. Punk never has a chance to slide in to stop him. And I love the way they did this. They stayed on the angle. They had the EMTs come down so they could do the stretcher job. Punk's out there while it's all happening. Adam Cole ran down as well. Their friendship obviously goes back a ways, so that makes sense. And they didn't gloss over it in 2 seconds like they probably would on Wednesday Night Whack-A-Mole. They spent remaining television time covering the gravity of it. The announcers are talking about it. It was all well done. Now, granted, they can't be doing shit like this every week. Elsewise, it'll start to come off like every other Dynamite angle where nothing ever has any meaning or impact because you see guys doing shit like this all the time. Once in a blue moon? Sure. By all means. Especially when the circumstances would actually call for it. It was a great heat magnet to build up the angle for Joe versus Punk next week. I even like that they got Cole involved because that means they might consider trying to factor him into the equation somehow. Now, granted, I've been outspoken about how I haven't been high on Adam Cole's run in AEW since he came back. A lot of that having to do with the Jericho stuff that nearly killed his momentum. The other half being the fact that he's probably in the worst physical shape I've ever seen him in. I know him and MJF are going to be doing that blind eliminator tournament next week. Hopefully they don't do anything stupid with that because, they're already walking a very fine line with that storyline already. We'll see. Cole's done a relatively decent job removing himself from all the elite tomfoolery. I'm glad he's kind of taking his work seriously now. I'm hoping that maybe with a little motivation from the Punk camp, they can persuade Cole to maybe hit the gym a few times a week with them and maybe get him on a better diet regimen. But I know I've been barking up that tree for the last year and a half. We'll see if anything changes. But like I said from the top, very good overall show. I like what I saw. Take out a few nitpicks and gripes here and there. This was probably one of the better TV shows I've seen AEW do in a long time. The card was serious. The show outline was fluid. Everything was easy to follow. I know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. I love the fact that there was no silliness or ridiculous antics going on. Everybody looked and came off professional. That's all I ask as a wrestling fan in 2023. I can overlook a lot of things. Yeah, you're going to have bad matches every now and then. Yeah, promos might not always go the way you intend. Yeah, you're going to have quirky things that happen, okay? It's just the natural state of wrestling. Not everything's going to work out as you initially plan. But I just want serious alternative wrestling products that I can believe in and I can buy into. When you remove the goofy cartoon antics, all the childish stuff going on. Great. Just give me a serious wrestling show with grown men that I can root for, boo, whatever the case is. But like I said, the show's not perfect. There are definitely some kinks they can work out over time. But we're 3 weeks into this thing. So far, the Saturday show is looking a lot more promising for the future of AEW. If Tony's willing to let Punk work with him side by side and offer suggestions of how to improve the quality of the show, it'll bode well for the company and Tony's ego. So, I think that'll wrap up the show for this week. Definitely got some more editing to do, but we'll get this one up on Monday because, well, I'm actually in town. So that's good. Anyway, we'll be back on Friday for the continuation of our retro review series and whatever horrors await us on Dynamite. I'm still going to give it a few more weeks, but I've been riding that dead horse for a long time now, and I don't know how much left she can take. That Wednesday show is just abhorrently rotten, and it's not getting any better. But we'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Peace out.